Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Tuesday night edition of College Basketball Picks. Myself, Joe Tansey, and Ryan Coyle here to bring you a breakdown on all the college basketball games across the 33-game slate here on Tuesday night. A lot of ranked teams in action, only one top 25 matchup, but the best basketball league in the country is the Big 12, and there's plenty of Big 12 action on the slate tonight. Ryan, I know you texted me earlier and said, I'm sorry, there's a bunch of power conference games on my card tonight, which is not usual for you, but tonight is about the power conferences. What are you most excited to see tonight?
Yeah, I think tonight was like reading up and down Twitter, and this is just a big now. Tonight's kind of the kickoff for a lot of people to start really getting into college basketball. So I'm sort of excited to start to see some of these teams now that we're headed into the thick of conference play. Get going and make some noise, and who's really going to start to emerge. I think the clear top team in the sport right now is Purdue. I don't think anybody would really argue against that. But then I think right below that, it's a wide open tier, and I could see a bunch of different teams being Final Four teams. I mean, Houston right there at number 2 right now. I'm intrigued to see how they fare tonight on the road at Iowa State. Nebraska is a team that I'm looking at tonight too. They're a team floating around the bubble right now, and they got Purdue coming to their place. So that's a game I'm going to have a close eye on. And then we have a nice Big 12 ranked versus ranked matchup with BYU and Baylor that I'm looking forward to. So a bunch of good games to really get some people's attention on college basketball. And we're 2 months away pretty much from March Madness. So a lot of hoops to consume over these next few months. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, this is basically the 8-week sprint to the national championship that a lot of people get into with college basketball. I know I make the joke all the time that this is the unofficial start of college basketball season now that we've gotten past the national championship, which we're not talking about because I was on Washington last night. To your point, the team futures at DraftKings Sportsbook, Purdue plus 850, Houston plus 1,000. And then if you look at the seventh on that line is Kentucky plus 1,600. All three of those teams in action tonight. You mentioned Purdue on the road. They've so far dealt with the road games in the Big Ten pretty well. At Nebraska tonight, Kentucky at home against Missouri, and then Houston on the road at Iowa State. Look, I think it's pretty easy to guess which one of those three would be most vulnerable tonight because Hilton Magic does still exist. But is that what you think, that Houston's probably the most vulnerable of the three big favorites for the national championship in action tonight?
I'm actually on Houston tonight, minus the 2.5 there. I'm not a believer in this Iowa State team. They're a team kind of like Minnesota, where at the beginning of this year, they've been playing cupcakes, like a very, very easy non-conference schedule. Iowa State's best win this season is against an Iowa team that I don't think, barring some pretty big changes on the defensive end, is going to make the tournament this year. And then their second best win is over a VCU team that's ranked 109th at KenPom. They have 0 quad one wins to start this year, and they've just really benefited from, like we've seen with the net, where if you run up the scoreboard on some of these bad teams, that's really going to improve your ranking. And Iowa State's been one of the teams that's done that the most. So they're kind of what I like to say, like a computer tricker, where they do everything right analytically, but on the court, it's really not living up to it right now. And I think Houston is just such a tough team, and they're going to kind of punk them and give Iowa State a little bit of a taste of humble pie, I guess we could say, to start off the Big 12 schedule. But I do like Houston going in there tonight and getting that win and covering that 2.5.
In case you haven't been watching college basketball this season, Houston is still very much Houston, the same team that we come to know and love under Kelvin Sampson. You basically just plug in different contributors in this team. If you look at all the defensive metrics on KenPom, Houston is in the top 5 in 95% of them. They just spanked West Virginia 89-55 in their first Big 12 game. Reminder that Houston now in the Big 12. It's easier with football, I think, because football drives the realignment. But to see Houston playing Iowa State tonight and Texas going to Cincinnati, that's really where the realignment kind of kicks in the reality of it with the Big 12, which makes it an even deeper league, to be honest. And BYU at Baylor tonight, the top 25 contest that we have on our hands. I want to get into that real quick before we really dive into our picks, Ryan. BYU, they were one of the darlings of non-conference play. Their offense playing at a fantastic level. But then you turn on the TV Saturday night. I think you and I both did the same thing after the NFL games were over. and BYU's getting contained by Cincinnati at home. Is that something to be concerned about, that life in the Big 12 is going to be a little rougher on BYU than we expect? Remember, they're coming over from the West Coast Conference in basketball, where Gonzaga is king, St. Mary's. So it's a tough brand of basketball, but a different brand of basketball. Do you think they stand any shot against Baylor tonight?
Yeah, so before that, I think with like Houston transferring from the American to the Big 12, Houston still had, Big 12 level athletes. I think guys coming from BYU, they're not the same group of athletes that like a Houston has. So I think that is where they're going to see the most adjustments. And they're kind of in the computer tricker type of team as well, where they're only 1-2 in quad 1, 1-0 in quad 2, 3-0 in quad 3, and 7-0 in quad 4. Sitting there with that 12-2 record, that best win over San Diego State. So this is a team that hasn't really proven much either. Baylor, though, has been very susceptible on the defensive end. Like, after they won that national title, they've really kind of shifted the focus to being like an all-out offensive team, where I thought Scott Drew always had a nice defensive game plan with his team over the course of time before that national title. They just kind of want to outscore you now. So I'm intrigued to see if BYU is able to keep up with them in the pace of play. But I think BYU is certainly a team now that we're in conference play. We're going to see start to regress to the mean a little bit. And instead of where they're kind of a 3 or 4 seed right now, I think in most bracket projections, I could see them by the end being like an 8 or 9. But I still think they'll be a team that'll find their way in come March.
So what you're saying is don't bet BYU to win the Big 12 at plus 800.
Yes, I do not think that is a nice wager. That's going to be an awesome race, though, down the stretch with Houston and Kansas, I think, as a clear top 1 and 2. But that's going to be a fun race. If they do, I don't know off the top of my head if they have a home and home, but that's going to be a tight one to the end of the season.
So it's interesting here with Houston and Kansas, because they do have a home and home, by the way.
Okay.
February 3rd at Allen Fieldhouse, and then season finale in Houston on March 9th, which is awesome. Thank you.
Good job by the schedule makers.
Yeah, it's amazing that they think that far ahead. The Big 12, real quick, because it is the deepest league. It is the league that we're going to focus so much attention on throughout the season. Big 12 champ, regular season champ odds right now at DraftKings: Houston plus 160, Kansas plus 260, Baylor third at plus 700, like we mentioned, BYU at plus 800. We're kind of really lukewarm on them right now. Oklahoma, a surprise story at plus 1200. Texas, who I've seen some people call a fraud a little bit, at plus 1800. Then you have Iowa State at plus 1900, and then TCU, Texas Tech, K-State, Cincinnati, UCF, OK State, and West Virginia. Is there any value in a long shot in the Big 12 right now, with Houston and Kansas being at the top of the table, or you want to wait for maybe another week or two to see how this thing pans out?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't do anything as of this moment. I am looking. I think Baylor at plus 700 with the third best odds there is a little bit intriguing, just because they can go out there and they can put up 90 points. Like if they're able to go out there and dictate the pace of play, I don't know if Kansas or Houston are necessarily built to play that type of game where in a shootout. So if Baylor is able to get those teams at home and get them playing their pace up tempo, I think that could definitely pose some problems, because Houston, as we know, that over under tonight's like 129.5. They want to play it 60 to 55. That's how they want to win this game. Kansas, we saw against TCU that they could go up and down the court and score if they want, but we know they're going to go through Hunter Dickinson. So Baylor's offense is certainly intriguing, but I don't know if that defense is going to last in the long term throughout the season. And real quick, too, I was kind of crapping on TCU last week because they played a terrible non-conference schedule, but they went into Kansas and took them down to the wire, and with a questionable flagrant call at the end, they might have won that game. So if you can go into Kansas and give them a fight down the stretch, you can beat anybody in that conference. So them at 22-1, I think it is worth a little bit of a look as well.
To a team that's scoring a lot of points and on a consistent basis and is getting some national championship buzz, that's Kentucky Wildcats. Not so much of a threat tonight against Missouri. They're a double-digit favorite. But if you look at the futures market, they're plus 500 to win the SEC regular season title, behind Tennessee, Auburn, and Alabama. Now, in terms of top-heavy, I think the SEC is probably number 2 behind the Big 12. In terms of depth, the Big 12 is always going to be number 1 with the amount of basketball schools they have. But the SEC and Kentucky, and they're playing at such a high level right now, Is that maybe a little disrespectful, that line being the fourth favorite to win the SEC?
Yeah, like this is my favorite Kentucky team certainly of the past 5 years. Like this is a fun
There
Kentucky
haven't been
bunch.
many fun Kentucky teams.
Yeah, and like you look at this one, they're putting up 85, 90 points a game. Like I want to say, I don't know if off the top of my head, but I think that they're second in the country in points per game. And they have guards that can go, and the emergence of Aaron Bradshaw, he's came back from his foot injury. I saw him in person in the game against Penn, and I've watched them a number of times on TV. He can play. He can step out and shoot the ball. He can rebound. He can block shots. He was just like another missing dimension to that team. So Kentucky's kind of like with Baylor too. They can go out and score, but are they going to be able to defend down the stretch? And as we know, they're playing so many freshmen. They have a couple key veterans in Mitchell and Reeves that get a good amount of playing time as well, but a bunch of guys that haven't been there, done that. And I kind of get worried about that when you go to Tennessee, when you go to Thompson Bowling Arena, they could just flat out punk you like they did last year against Duke in the NCAA tournament, where you're not going to come in and push us around. We're going to have these 22, 23-year-old grown men show these 18 and 19-year-old kids what it's like to win a game in the SEC. So a little bit scared about that, but they're a fun team to watch. And if you're going to be watching a lot of Kentucky this year, I think it's worth this sprinkle just because they're going to be a group to watch all year and have a lot of eyeballs on them.
Kentucky has scored over 80 points in their last 5 games, and that's kind of adjusted in the lines tonight in the game against Missouri. Kentucky's team total, I actually looked at this earlier, 86.5 points. It
Yeah.
says a lot of what the odds makers think of Kentucky. And by the way, they haven't just gone over 80. They've gone 87, 95, 96, and 87 in their last 4 games, and 2 of them against North Carolina and Florida. So no slouch. That's an interesting thing to follow and kind of get into these team props as well when you see these high-scoring teams. But yeah, Kentucky's a very, very interesting team. I don't know if it's not a redemption story because Cal's always had the best talent. He just hasn't put it all together. But the SEC is going to be fascinating because, like you said, there's a team like Tennessee who they're built by veterans. They're not going to do many things wrong, but can Kentucky stretch them out and make it a really tough game when they do play in a few weeks? That'll be very fascinating to keep an eye on. But the Big 12 and the SEC, I mean, look, yes, we're Big East guys at heart up here, and the Big East is going to be super fun. But from a national perspective, the Big 12 and the SEC are going to be in focus every single night. There's one of those teams in action. There's that many national championship caliber teams across both of those conferences. But speaking of the Big East, there's 2 games tonight. I know you have a play at 6:30 in this Seton Hall Georgetown game. So let's dive right into the picks. Talk to me about Seton Hall Georgetown, then we'll get into everything else that tips off at 7 and beyond.
Yeah, so this was one I was going back and forth with all day. I was like, do I really want to trust Georgetown with my money? But I think this is a good spot for them. And I think Ed Cooley is going to be able to pick off a few teams this year kind of unexpectedly. He's just that good of a coach. And I think they've shown a little bit of improvement here and there, but they're going to be an inconsistent team all season. But I'm looking at more of a letdown spot here for Seton Hall. They're coming off a huge week last week with 2 ranked wins, going to Providence and winning that game, and then a big game on Saturday against Marquette, winning that one outright at home. I think this could be like a fall flat type of spot for Seton Hall here. Seton Hall did turn it over 22 times in that game on Saturday, and they were trying to give it away. Tyler Cole probably played his worst game of the season. So this is a Seton Hall team, too, that isn't supremely talented. They're just playing really hard right now and executing. I wouldn't be surprised if they won, but I do think Georgetown's able to keep it close in this one. And it's just a weird night with the weather and everything. You don't know how many people are traveling, going to games, because this is something up and down the entire East Coast. I could see it being a dead building. And Georgetown just winning like a slop fest, like a 50 to like 48 type of game, real ugly, low scoring. So I think the under could be a play there too. But I just think Seton Hall's not that great, not that talented, and Georgetown's not going to have to be fighting uphill against a more talented team all night. So I like Georgetown to cover that 7 tonight.
This is what you do when you bet Georgetown. You hold your nose and hope it doesn't stink.
Yeah.
at least until Ed Cooley figures that whole thing out. They've been a popular team to fade for quite some time. So I started this new format today. A favorite, an underdog, an over/under, and a team prop that I like for each of the weekdays. It's just going to help me with getting into all the college basketball and not overwhelming myself on the non-Saturday games. And I know you have one of each except for the team total. So we're going to format it like this and go over some of our picks. My favorite, I love saying that, favorite, is Kansas State. And this goes into like the deeper depths of the Big 12, but West Virginia just isn't good right now.
Mm-hmm.
The exodus they had in the offseason after Bob Huggins was let go was pretty significant. And they really have not recovered much since then. And you look at Kansas State team, look, it was stinky to me when I first looked at it because I was like, 2-point favorite on the road at West Virginia, could be a difficult type of game. And then you look at West Virginia, they haven't beaten a KenPom top 100 team. They're 0-7 first teams in that category. And Kansas State's defense has been fantastic of late, have not allowed more than 62 points in each of their last 5 games. And you'll notice tonight with the picks I've made, it's defense over the last 2 to 3 weeks that I'm really valuing in these teams. But I look at this game and I see K-State. I really do. If it's a trap, it's a trap. I'll gladly fall into it. But West Virginia, the numbers just don't make sense why this game is so tight on the line. So I'm going to take K-State as my favorite. So I know you mentioned Houston. What else do you have in terms of favorites tonight?
Houston is the only favorite I have on my card. I kind of have a pretty similar model to what you were talking about too. But yeah, as we touched on, Houston -2.5 at Iowa State. I think this Iowa State team is a fraud. We kind of saw it last year too. Like they were a very highly ranked team. They were like a 3 to 4 seed, and they wound up being an 11 come tournament time. Like I think once we're in conference play now, they're not that talented of a bunch, and in a super deep Big 12, we're going to kind of see that. And I think tonight is one of the first examples of that. So yeah,
reality
Houston
check in for them.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
So I look at, in terms of underdogs tonight, not really an inspiring slate for me, to be honest with you. But there was one that stood out to me in the ACC, and that's Notre Dame. Now, look, they're not going to be the best team in the ACC by any stretch of the imagination. That belongs to the regular cast of characters, your Virginias, your Dukes, North Carolina. It's going to be fantastic at the top of that conference. But North Carolina is at least playing some pretty good defensively. And if you've noticed, defense is going to be my theme tonight. And they rank 47th in the country in points allowed per game. They only held Duke to 67 points, which I think to me is a nice little morale boost for a team under a first-year head coach where you're building towards something. You're not exactly contending, but you're making sure you're competitive throughout the season. And
they've been playing, sorry to cut you off, but they've been playing a lot better since he went off in that press conference after the loss to the Citadel. Like I think there was definitely like if you don't figure it out, you're done here. Like let's go. And I think the guys really have responded to that and been playing hard. I took them on Saturday against Duke, the 14.5, and they were right in it down to the very end. So I like that play as well.
Yeah, I thought about the money line, but I'm taking them plus 6.5 against Georgia Tech. I feel like this is going to be a pretty level matchup, and Georgia Tech's defense nowhere close to where Notre Dame's is. There's actually a 9-point difference in points allowed per game between the Fighting Irish and the Yellow Jackets. So again, I'm riding with defense tonight. It's not really my favorite thing to do in college basketball, but I've seen a bunch of these teams that are playing tonight play some really good defensive late, and that's where I'm going. I know you mentioned Georgetown as the dog. We got that out of the way for the 6:30 tip-off. Any other underdogs that have your interest tonight?
Yeah, I'm also on South Carolina plus 11.5. I think
this is interesting.
I think this Alabama team is very overrated as well. They're another team that is really grading out well analytics wise and in the computers, but they're only 9-5, and in eye test wise, they haven't really impressed me much this year. South Carolina too, 11-3 against the spread on the year. So I mean, I don't need them to win. Just lose the game by 11, and I'll take that. Like you're giving me the 11 points. I'll take that every single day. And Alabama looking to, I guess, start building some momentum now that they're in SEC play. But South Carolina has a lot of momentum. They just had a big-time win over a bubble team in Mississippi State on Saturday. This is a team that could trend to a potential tournament team by year's end. And winning games like this on the road against a highly ranked team in the net, that's going to do a lot for your resume. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them to win this game outright. But if you're going to give me the 11 points, I'll take that every day.
I still have battle scars from last year's Alabama-South Carolina game because it was the game after the whole Brandon Miller thing came out.
Yep.
And myself and Sean Brace, I'll remember this. the two of us just texted nonstop through that game because I read it. I'm like, South Carolina, there's no way Bama is going to be up for it. And this game obviously happened in Columbia. And we were so close. We were so close to getting everything across the line that we had on South Carolina. They covered against them last year in that game, obviously completely different circumstances. But yeah, South Carolina is a team in that mid-tier of the SEC to absolutely keep an eye on. Let's talk points. Everybody's favorite thing to do, bet the overs. Look, there's one conference in college sports that we associate all the time with the overs, right? It's the MAC. And MAC football did not have a lot of high-scoring teams this year.
No.
But MAC basketball does. And it's Toledo and Kent State, two of the better teams in the MAC as well. This actually has a national TV slot tonight on CBS Sports Network. Toledo and Kent State. I called this my don't overthink yourself play in my write-up over on Substack. They both average over 78 points per game, shoot better than 45% from the field. It's a layup, right?
You think so? I mean, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. These are two teams that I remember in college taking them on Friday nights. It was the MAC over on Fridays. And Toledo was always the go-to team in that spot, and Kent State no slouch themselves either. So I really like that play as well, just stylistically past few years, and they continue to do it this year. Two teams are just going to get up and down, and it might be like first 1 to 90 wins this game.
The only problem with the up and down games, and I've experienced this firsthand, is if you get a 4-minute stretch where nobody makes a bucket, it is the most harrowing thing to do when you bet an over in college basketball. Is you see that 4-minute stretch and you know it's happening. The total is just being taken away from you with a stretch of 2 or 3 minutes of missed shots. It's it's such a nightmare. But that's the way the pendulum swings. What do you have on an over tonight?
So I'm on the over of 151 in the Wake Forest Florida State game. It's moved in the opposite direction a little bit. I think it's at like 149.5 right now. But Florida State this year, another disappointing year for them. I think coming into the year, expectations were that they would right the ship and maybe get back around to a tournament team. They haven't been able to defend at all this year. They're 9-5 to the over, and Wake Forest is 8-6 to the over. I think Florida State's going to struggle to contain this Wake Forest team that can really score the basketball and get up and down the floor themselves. Wake has scored 80 or more in 6 straight games, and I know you were talking about earlier a team total, so I looked up Wake Forest. Their team total is 77.5, so I like them to hit that over too. I mean, 6 straight games they've gone over 80 points. Their guards can really go. Hunter Salas has been balling, the transfer from Gonzaga. I think this is a spot where we see a game in the high 70s, both ways, potentially even the 80s.
Is Wake Forest a contender in the ACC?
I think that they're going to be a tournament team, a contender. I'm a big fan of this North Carolina squad, but I think it's clearly Duke and UNC, and then a whole bunch of you could have a coin flip every night with most of those teams like Wake Forest, Virginia, Miami, Clemson. I think that's going to be a really interesting mix for 3 to 6 there. But I think we might only see like 4 or 5 ACC teams get in at the end of the day.
To the unders, this one was pretty straightforward for me. I mentioned Cincinnati when we were talking about the Big 12 earlier. I watched Cincinnati shut down a BYU team. Now, look, they may be a little overrated because of what their non-conference schedule was. But to see Cincinnati go into Provo in a very raucous home environment that BYU has and win that game and limit BYU's offense, that was really impressive. I think you'll see something similar tonight against Texas. When I saw Texas and Cincinnati on the schedule, the first thing I did this morning was look at what the total was on this game because Cincinnati's defense is playing off the charts good. It's not Mick Cronin rock fight type level yet, but it's getting there. Like Cincinnati is going to be one of those teams this year. They're not going to be a fun watch. And that's probably the best compliment you can pay to a defensive-minded team like Cincinnati. They're going to score, but when they're in a matchup like this tonight against Texas, I could see this one easily being in like the 120s, the 130s, and not even sniffing the surface of this total, which is 146. I hammered the under. These last two plays I'm giving out are my 2 favorite on the board. And look, Texas, I saw some tweets earlier this week about are they a little bit of a fraudulent team from where they're ranked because they just lost to Texas Tech. They lost to Marquette. They lost to UConn. And if you look at their wins, there's only
best
one.
Best LSU.
Yeah, and it's against 1 KenPom top 100 team at LSU. The rest, I mean, after that, you have to go to UNC Greensboro, who's ranked 138th on KenPom for their second best win. It's not really great. I think this is where, in a matchup where Cincinnati's defense plays really well, where Texas struggles. And I think I don't think it gets anywhere close to the total tonight. I think 146 is way too high for Texas and Cincinnati. And look, Texas's defense has been playing pretty well, regardless of what their opponents look like. They held 4 of their last 5 opponents in wins under 65 points. Now, LSU put 85 on them, and Texas Tech put 78 on them. But there are some things to like about their defense, and if you add that to what Cincinnati is already doing on defense, I think it's not going to be the most pretty basketball game, but I think in terms of getting a bet home, I think getting the under home is going to be pretty easy in that game.
Yeah, I'm going to stick in the Big 12 for an under as well. I'm going to Oklahoma State, Texas Tech. I got it at 138. I think it's down to 134.5 now. Like, this number has plummeted since around noon Eastern time earlier. So this one's going down, but I think this is a typical Big 12 slugfest. I watched Baylor, Oklahoma State, and as we talked about at the beginning with Baylor and their ability to get up and down and score a lot of points, Oklahoma State was able to kind of limit them. And that game went to overtime too, and the under still hit. So a very strong defensive team in Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech with Grant McCasland as the coach there now, as we know with his time at North Texas, one of the better defensive teams in the country. So I really like the under in this one. Like, I think it's going to be played in the 60s. And over at Haslam Metrics, another kind of basketball analytics site I look at, 2 teams that play with some of the slowest paces in the country. Oklahoma State ranked 236th in pace, and Texas Tech is 286. So I think we're going to see like 62 to 60 type of game. Another one, not the most visually appealing, but I think that 138, we've already seen the line move with it. But I really like the under in this game. I think it's a slugfest.
Yeah, everything I've applied for North Texas over the last 2 years, I've just copy and pasted that over to Texas Tech because Grant McCasland has jumped from the Mean Green to the Red Raiders, and it's very much showing. And look, there's nothing wrong with that style of basketball, but it's just not the most appeasing. The last one, now I made this pick, and full disclosure here, I made it before realizing that it's on something called the Mountain West Network. It's not even on like an ESPN Plus. I can't find it on one of like the CBS Sports or FS1, whatever the Mountain West Network is, which is probably just going to be my Bleacher Report app that I watch the game tracker through, is Nevada team total over 73.5. It's jumped to 74.5. I still like it there against Air Force tonight. Air Force, their defense has just gone south very quick. First of all, Nevada averages 79.1 points per game. Air Force has allowed over 73 during their 4-game winning streak. And here's the kicker for this one. Nevada, in all their 14 victories, scored at least 72 points, and they've gotten to 74, which is the total I got at, 9 of those times. I think this is a Nevada team that really takes care of business against Air Force tonight. And I looked at the total as well because it's very low. I think it's 131. 132. It's been fluctuating all day. So if that Nevada team total goes up before you get it before tip-off, I'd look at the over as well. I think Nevada puts up a lot of points on a very susceptible Air Force defense.
All right, and I have 2 more plays. Actually, I have one over and one under. I'm going to go with the under of 140.5 in the Rutgers-Indiana game. Rutgers 10-4 to the under this year. Their last 2 games have gone over. This is a team that I don't think is going to hit 3 straight overs, and the game being played at the rack too. And they're playing an Indiana team that lives inside the arc. They're not a good shooting team at all, and Rutgers actually has a very good 2-point defense. So I think this is another rock fight type game. 140.5 is way too much. I think it's going to be 65-60 Rutgers. I could see being the final score. And then the over I have is the Purdue-Nebraska game, over of 150.5. Purdue 10-5 this year to the over, and Nebraska 9-6 to the over. And I think this is actually going to be a pretty tight game. Not going to go down to the wire, but I could see Nebraska being there within striking distance. And if they're in it close enough at the end, I could see some free throws potentially add into some points as well. Nebraska can really shoot the 3 ball well, and as we know, Purdue They can win any way they want. They can score 90 points or they can win a game in the 60s. So if Nebraska is at home in this one, they're looking to dictate the pace of play. I think we're going to see a higher scoring affair, and I like the over in that game.
Keisei Tominaga, one of the more underrated players in college basketball at Nebraska, if you get a chance to watch him. And you want to watch Purdue tonight? He's one of the guys that you'll fall in love with playing. He's a scoring machine for Nebraska. So that'll do it here for our Tuesday college basketball picks. We'll be back tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow and Thursday. We got a loaded Sixers NBA slate tomorrow and a bunch of college basketball as well throughout the week, and plenty of football to take care of over the weekend. NFL, not college, though. A little disappointing. It's over. But for Ryan Coyle, I am Joe Tansey. Those are our picks for Tuesday night slate. Good luck, everybody, and we'll talk to you again later this week.